About to be joined by Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. I mean, look, I already fired it up. Mike Conley, Rob Dillingham, for Schroeder and Devin Carter. Just get it done.
I would do that. I don't think Minnesota would.
Here, have a second. Have a second and scram. 916-339-1140. We are joined by Brett Siegel, National NBA insider and reporter for Clutch Points. Brett, thank you so much for joining us, man. Happy Tuesday.
Hey, Allen, it's nice to talk to you again. And, yeah, it's Tuesday, end of the week, heading out to Vegas for the NBA Cup. And right after that, we're going to be in the midst of trade season. So a lot's happening right now.
Okay, so let's start there. Brett, do you think, because we met in Summer League, it was really nice finally getting to meet you in person. So you're headed out to Vegas again. Obviously, Summer League is a different beast, but do you think that there will be some rumors? You got the winter meetings going on for Major League Baseball and deals being done basically every hour. Do you think that there will be a good level of intel that you'll run into out there in Vegas during the NBA Cup, or is it more just the teams that are playing and figuring out who's going to win the whole thing and try to avoid touching the Michelob Ultra?
It's definitely not as much. Obviously, the teams that are there, you'll get a better grasp of kind of the positioning that they're in and their ideology heading in to the December 15th deadline, as we like to call it, when a lot of players become trade eligible from this past offseason from signing deals. But the main focus really is December 19th to the 22nd, and that's the G League Showcase down in Orlando, where every team will be at. A lot of executives will be down there, and that's really where you can say, in quotes, the NBA winter meetings really happen, and that's where deals get done. That's where a better idea of what the trade market looks like for all the teams around the league and kind of what's forming there. So there will be a better idea of what's going to happen with Giannis after that date. There's going to be a better idea of what the Mavericks are thinking with Anthony Davis. And then obviously once those two big dominoes fall and we have a better idea of what's going to happen there, we'll be able to kind of tell the tale for what's going to happen with these other teams with lesser players and smaller contracts. So these next 2 weeks are very important, but I would definitely say that the G League Showcase definitely trumps whatever we're going to hear out in Las Vegas.
Talking to Brett Siegel, National NBA insider for Clutch Points. Well, let's start here, Brett. It didn't take very long. What did we even get 3 months before Jonathan Kuminga's agent was tweeting and Jonathan Kuminga getting DNPs with Steph Curry not even playing? Give us the newest updates you have on Jonathan Kuminga, and I guess what is the value the Warriors, a lot of people are saying the Warriors maybe fumbled the bag on this one. What is the value right now with Jonathan Kuminga in a potential deal? Where do you see this thing going, and when do you possibly see it happening?
Well, I'll answer it like this. I don't think they necessarily fumbled the bag, and the main reason for that is because if you traded him in the offseason, you would have had to follow the base year compensation rules. So you would have been sending out his salary in a sign-in trade. You only would have been able to absorb 50% of it coming back in incoming salary. And so you couldn't really get the value that you were looking for if you're the Warriors there in the offseason. Now, has his value changed? Possibly, and that's one of the topics that we're really going to dive into throughout the month of December. Really talked with executives and teams around the league of what they feel about this guy and who would even be interested. But if you're the Warriors, you had to get that $20+ million salary slot just so you have a buffer to be able to go out and make a move to improve your roster. They have that. They have young talent like Moses Moody and Brandon Pajemski to sweeten a deal if they want to. They have draft picks if they wanted to include those for a potential bigger name, whether that be a Herb Jones or Trey Murphy from the New Orleans Pelicans. But he's certainly on the trade block. I know that we've wrote about it before, how they're not just going to trade him. But at this point, with how everything's looking, it's very clear that he does not want to be there anymore, and Steve Kerr doesn't want to even play him anymore. This is going to be something that teams watch heading into January once he becomes trade eligible on January 15th. And once he does, I don't think it's going to be long after that date where the Warriors have a deal for him. And whether that's to send him to an Eastern Conference team, a Western Conference team, there's still plenty of weeks to figure that out. But it does seem like that Jonathan Kuminga's time with the Warriors has come to an end.
Talking to Brett Siegel, National NBA insider for Clutch Points. So, yeah, Brett, you had Mark Spears yesterday say that the Kings no longer are going to include a first-round pick in a deal, which would leave just Malik Monk, right? From what you have understood so far from the Jonathan Kuminga situation, does it sound like the Warriors would look at that and see fair value, or would they prefer to pay more to get something back like a Trey Murphy? I know you wrote about the Pelicans wanting what was it, a potential young player, young star, and draft compensation as well. Do you think the Warriors are more likely to pay more to get back a Trey Murphy versus fine, we'll go with Malik Monk and save that draft capital? I guess it kind of feels like, is this about wanting to have something left for when Steph is done, or truly going all in and saying, hey, we'll spend more, right, on a potential Trey Murphy or whoever. I know they kind of wanted Giannis as well, deal like that, versus saving the draft picks for when Steph is done, but only getting back somebody like a Malik Monk. Where do you think they'd be headed as of right now?
Golden State will certainly pay more if there's a player on the table that they feel pushes them over the edge in terms of being a championship contender, whether that's Herb Jones, whether it's Trey Murphy. We'll see kind of what happens there and what develops over the next few months, because they are still evaluating their roster as well, and they're getting production from some of those guys that are the unlikely heroes. I mean, Pat Spencer's a guy on a two-way contract right now, and he's been their best player over the last week with Steph out. So we'll see kind of how this roster develops and who really proves themselves and steps into a bigger role, because that will kind of tell the tale of what position that they're really going to want as well. And Malik Monk, he's another guard. It just does not seem like that is a position that they're going to be looking to add in. If anything, they're going to be looking to sweeten a deal with Kuminga by whether that's including Brandon Podziemski or one of these other guards on their roster. But unless that is the only offer out there as a Malik Monk, Sacramento Kings trade, and the Warriors just want this to end, that's the only way I can see them really accepting that package. But they do not want Malik Monk. He's not a player that they had interest in the offseason, and that has continued into this season. I just don't see any deal that is going to be just the Kings and the Warriors. If Kuminga is going to end up in Sacramento by the trade deadline or before then, it's going to have to be a multi-team trade, because the assets that the Kings have just isn't what the Warriors want contractually and player-wise. So that's something that Kings fans would have to watch, is what other teams could potentially get involved here. Where could we ship a guy like Malik Monk? Where could we ship DeMar DeRozan? Is Domantas Sabonis going to be on this roster once he comes back healthy? So there's still a lot of question marks that Sacramento has to answer, and we're going to get some answers to those questions over the course of the next 4 weeks, not only with Sabonis getting healthier, but also as these guys play more and as teams around the league kind of figure out what direction they want to head in.
Talking to Brett Siegel, national NBA insider for Clutch Points. Yeah, Brett, speaking of DeMar DeRozan, I know the term has been used, it's a pseudo-expiring contract. Where do you see, I'm of the mindset, I don't necessarily need the Kings to get back a ton for DeMar DeRozan. I'm more interested in just moving forward, no disrespect to him. But where do you see DeMar DeRozan's value in a potential deal, what the Kings could get back for him?
I think that he's going to be in one of those deals that is a multi-team trade, and I think that's going to be kind of a throw-in where his salary is needed for the Kings to get something done that they're obviously eyeing, whether it's Kuminga, whether it's something else, just to get back future draft compensation or to move a guy like Malik Monk and Keegan Ellis. Maybe you include DeMar DeRozan in one of those trades just to take back some expiring salaries or second-round picks or whatever it be. But I do think that there's going to be some value around the league in DeRozan, especially near the trade deadline when teams are a lot more desperate. There's going to be some contending teams or some playoff, borderline playoff teams that need an extra scorer and need a veteran presence in their locker room. And I think that you're going to see DeRozan get thrown into one of those trades. So just one scenario that can come to mind off the top of my head here is if Giannis decides to stay with the Bucks, that's probably a destination that they're going to say, you know what, getting a guy like DeMar DeRozan makes a lot of sense, because you can try to compete this year. You can bring in a guy that can be a number 2, number 3 scorer next to Giannis and Miles Turner. And then obviously you can kind of see how things play out there if you're the Bucks. Another situation I know that's been mentioned multiple times, the Los Angeles Clippers. Whether or not that actually happens really depends on what angle the Clippers want to go this season. Will Kawhi Leonard and James Harden remain there? We just can't get a firm answer on that at this time. And then obviously the big piece that the Clippers have that strong, significant interest right now is Ivica Zubac. And there's a lot of interest from Eastern Conference teams that are looking for front court upgrades right now in Zubac. And there would obviously be some Western Conference teams as well that would be interested in the 28-year-old center. So Clippers are kind of in one of those waiting periods. I think that's one of those big dominoes waiting to fall around the league of what direction is Steve Ballmer and Lawrence Frank going to take this organization. And if they are still in with this core of Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, they're going to be looking to make moves to try to win right now instead of just selling pieces off. So that could be another situation where you view a guy like DeMar DeRozan, you bring him in. If it doesn't work out and you don't succeed as a team, you just dump him in the offseason with that pseudo expiring contract. So there's a lot of teams that we're still kind of waiting to see. Now will kind of dictate the market for these Kings players, especially DeMar DeRozan.
Talking to Brett Siegel, and Brett of Clutch Points, you brought up a name and it just made me think. Obviously, Domantas Sabonis isn't playing right now, but you brought up a name in Ivica Zubac. Would you say, I understand that with the second apron, everybody is just very weary of how much money they're spending and what they're putting on their books. Would you say that the Ivica Zubac market is stronger than Domantas Sabonis just based on the fact that he gets paid half of what Domantas Sabonis gets paid, or am I overstepping?
No, you're not at all. 100%. There's significantly more interest in Zubac, not only because of the contract size, but also just because of the type of player he is. I mean, Zubac was an all-defensive talent last season. He took a major step in the right direction as one of the league's most improved players. And he's the type of guy that you can put at the top of the arc. He's not going to shoot, but he can help set screens. He can help facilitate your offense. And he can play in a lot of different systems, especially with another big man. That's kind of where the questions lie with Domantas Sabonis is, if he got traded to a team that already has an established center, would he be willing to be a power forward? How would that work out? Is his style of play going to clash with other centers around the league? And then obviously that contract that he's on, he's making $42 million this year. In 2027, when he's going to be in the final year of his contract, he's going to be at $48.5 million. And that's a lot of money for a team to take on the books right now, given how much concern there is about clearing space for the first and second aprons and being able to play around in the offseason with whether that be trade talks or free agency and having access to your mid-level exceptions. So any team that would potentially pursue Sabonis is giving away all that flexibility. Any team that trades for Zubac and potentially adds him to their roster would still have access to all those amenities. So that's kind of why the Zubac contract and his player mold is so valuable right now around the league.
Yeah, and, Sam Amick was on, we've been talking about it all show long because he was on the Run It Back pod and had brought up this idea of the 3 to 5 years. And that's kind of how I see it, Brett. You got Zach LaVine, who has at least one, next season changes things because it'll be expiring. But between Zach LaVine and Domantas Sabonis, I just don't see a world, and why they bring up the 3 to 5 year timeline. I do not see a world, Brett, and tell me if you do. I know teams can get desperate, but I just don't see a world where the Kings are able to move off of, if you look at it as a big three, DeMar and Domantas Sabonis and Zach LaVine. I don't really see a world where they can move off of both of them, specifically this trade deadline. I really just see DeMar DeRozan, and then you figure the rest out as you get into the summer, where at least at that point, Zach LaVine would be officially expiring.
Right. Yeah, I think that there would be a little bit of interest from, I would probably say 3 to 4 teams for LaVine ahead of this trade deadline, even with that contract size, simply because next season he's going to be in the final year of his deal. He'll opt into that $48 million player option, and then there'll be an expiring contract. And for the type of scorer he is, he could easily fit in with several contending teams around the league right now. It's just a matter if they're willing to give up the contracts on their end to bring in a player like LaVine. DeRozan, we talked about, again, he's going to be on an expiring contract next season. You could even dump him with that partial guarantee if you wanted to, if you traded for him at this trade deadline. And then heading into the offseason, if you just want to free up that money, you're willing to eat the $10 million, you could do so with DeRozan. It's just different with Sabonis. Unless there's a team out there that genuinely has interest in his style of play and sees him as their center of the future, that's really the only way Domantas Sabonis gets traded at this deadline. It's not like teams are going to look at him and be like, you know what, we can kind of take a chance here. We can take a flyer on him, and if things don't work out, we can just move on. Well, you're going to be locked into him for the next 2 to 3 years, unlike Zach LaVine, unlike DeMar DeRozan. So that's kind of where the Kings' value lies. I think it would be much easier for them to move both LaVine and DeRozan at this trade deadline than it would be anybody else on their roster.
Talking to Brett Siegel, a name that we haven't brought up a lot, Brett, and he's going to be available starting on the 15th of December, is Dennis Schroeder. So Dennis Schroeder, he's been out with that hip. But I don't know, Brett. It just feels like we haven't talked about him enough. he's another guy where I think he was brought in early on to see if the Kings could essentially do what the Suns are doing and prove some people wrong. They ended up not being able to do that. Now he does not fit any timeline here. Brett, I'm looking at the Timberwolves. I'm looking at the Rockets. I know Reed Shepherd has played well, but where do you think this thing could go for Dennis Schroeder? Are you hearing anything yet? Just as it pertains to him, he gets leapfrogged by Russell Westbrook on an expiring contract. Where do you think this thing goes for Dennis Schroeder on a pretty tradable contract?
Not much that we're hearing about Schroeder right now. Obviously, he signed that 3-year deal in the offseason. He'll become trade eligible before the trade deadline. And where could he potentially fit? Obviously, you brought up Minnesota. That's a known team that needs a point guard, and the Houston Rockets obviously need one too. But the Rockets have their back up against the wall with the first apron hard cap. They don't really have a means to improve their roster by getting a big contract. So I would rule that out. If anything, for the Rockets to add a player, whether that be free agency when the contracts would be lowered later in the season, that's an option for them. Or maybe they even take a look at Chris Paul, since he's going to be on a minimum contract and they could give up a minimum contract in exchange for him. That's kind of what I'm looking at for the Rockets to improve their backcourt depth. I don't think that they're going to go after a guy like Dennis Schroeder, who still has 2 more years left on his contract after this season. It would just be a short-term thing there. But you look at some of these situations around the league and some of those big-name all-star point guards that we're hearing in the trade market, Trae Young, LaMelo Ball, John Morant. If one of them get moved, maybe there's a way that you could easily slide Schroeder into a deal and send him to one of those teams that gets rid of a star guard, and they could use him in the short term, and maybe you get back something out of that. So, again, it's similar to what we were describing with DeRozan, Allen, where have other trades happen around the league, and then the Kings can get involved and say, well, hey, we got this kind of contract for matching purposes. We can give you DeRozan. We can give you Dennis Schroeder if you'll give us 1 or 2 second-round picks. I think that's kind of how the Kings need to operate at this point, because they're sellers, but nobody is really rushing to their store to buy these guys. It's just going to be a matter of where they can find value and where they can fit in.
It seems like every year there's somebody who hijacks the trade market or the free agency. You had KD, and that was this offseason, even though he was traded. And it feels like it's been Giannis before, but no, for real this time, as we talk to Brett Siegel. Brett, are we going to have to wait for this Giannis thing for any other deals to happen? Is that the big domino, or could other deals happen outside of Giannis? Are we going to be stuck waiting for him? Feels like we have before, even though he never went anywhere. But are we going to have to wait for him to be moved before anything else turns out?
That's kind of how I'm operating on the mindset right now, and everybody that I talk with around the league, other executives, they want to know first, is Giannis actually available? Because there have been teams calling the Bucks, and the answer that they've gotten back is that Giannis is not available right now. So unless Giannis requests a trade and he firmly tells John Horst and the Bucks that, yes, he does not want to play there anymore, he wants to go somewhere else, that's kind of the holdup. Until that happens, the Bucks aren't going to make any significant changes. They're not going to be going to teams saying, give us your best offer for Giannis, and they're not going to be accepting offers for Giannis. And teams that are interested in him, they're not then going to make other moves because they want to actually know, does Giannis want to be there past the February 5th trade deadline? So until that domino falls, we're not going to really see anything else. So you could see 1 or 2 small moves that don't really have any bearing over teams that would be pursuing Giannis. Maybe it's rebuilding teams that are swapping draft picks or something like that, or the Indiana Pacers, maybe they go and get a center upgrade because they're not going to be in the market for Giannis whatsoever. So that's kind of the only type of moves that you would see without him. But other than that, yeah, everybody's just waiting to see and know whether or not Giannis will be available.
Talking to Brett Siegel. Brett, you made me think of something when you were bringing up who is and isn't going to be available. I never know what the Pelicans are up to, but I do think that the Kings and how, I guess, transparent they've been, everybody knows that the Kings players are available, right? And I wonder, is this a situation where, you're in class and the same person that always raises their hand, a lot of times that was me, is raising their hand and the teacher says, anybody else? Is that going to be the situation this trade season? Are the buyers out there going to wait for, I know we talked about Giannis, but let's say the Pelicans. Are the buyers out there going to wait for maybe the Pelicans and possibly even the Jazz who are saying, no, we want to build around marketing now? Are the Kings going to just be standing around while buyers are waiting for other teams to kind of change their stance on things?
Pretty much, and that's really the only way that I can realistically see the Kings making any move because of the contracts that they have. They don't have these valuable contracts as we look at. One of the teams that always comes up in conversations is the Indiana Pacers. They've done a great job of having their two stars, and then they have very flexible, very easy contracts around them if they wanted to make a potential move. And when you compare the Kings to the Indiana Pacers, there's a big difference there because the Kings contracts that they want to move, you're talking about Zach LaVine at $47 million, Domantas Sabonis at $40 million, DeMar DeRozan at $25 million. It's tough to move those kind of contracts in the middle of the season, especially in today's age of the first and second apron restraints that these teams are facing, and so many teams being hard capped around the league at one of those apron marks. The Kings don't have the flexibility to kind of help other teams out. It's just a matter of, hey, are you interested in this guy, and can we fit into the equation of matching salaries? That's the only way the Kings are going to be able to make a significant move at the trade deadline, and that's why I say they're going to need a third or fourth team to get involved here, just because there's going to be so many moving parts to make contracts equal. And for those teams that are going to be buyers, they're not going to be able to send out 3 or 4 guys to one team just to get one back. That's why you're going to need another team to get involved, and that's why the Sacramento Kings can get involved by taking on some potential bigger contracts that are either expiring or have another year left, just to get rid of guys like DeRozan and LaVine.
Just a couple more for you, Brett. I know you're busy running around. We're approaching December 15th, and more of these players are going to be available. Keon Ellis, there was a thought that maybe the Lakers, I know Sam Amick mentioned the Lakers, they need a 3-and-D guy. Where do you see Keon Ellis's value at right now? The Lakers got the 27th pick in the draft. Do you think the Kings, if Keon agrees to an extension, do you think like Pascal Siakam did, could the Kings get a first-rounder back for Keon, or does that sound a little bit too rich for some of these teams' blood? Well, what is the value for Keon Ellis right now?
Well, there's definitely teams interested in him. We have heard that, and obviously the Lakers would be an interesting fit there given the need and the type of role that he would play. But I think that Keon Ellis is much more valuable as being a sweetener and an extension to one of those guys like we talked about, whether it's DeMar DeRozan or Malik Monk. If you include Keon Ellis in that trade, all of a sudden that increases the overall value of the trade because, hey, you're going to take on one of these guys' contracts. We'll give you a young player and Keon Ellis out of it. And I think that that's kind of where the interest lies at this point with the Kings, is if they can include Ellis with one of these other guys and they can get back a draft pick, that's going to be viewed as a win in their mind because it does not appear as if there's any future for Keon Ellis in Sacramento. It kind of seems like the Jonathan Kuminga situation in a way where we know this is ending. It's just on better terms than Kuminga with the Warriors compared to Ellis with the Kings. So we know that it's ending. We know that he's most likely going to be moved. And so if you attach him to get off a contract like DeMar DeRozan, hey, maybe you can get back a smaller contract, a guy in his mid-20s or something that you can turn into whatever you want, and then you can get a future draft pick out of it. I think that would be the best case scenario for the Kings at this point. But Keon Ellis, if you're going to trade him by himself, it's just a $2 million contract. And the Kings, who are hard capped at the first apron, there's only so much that you can do to help yourself by just trading him. So that's why I say I think it's much more likely that he gets kind of wrapped into one of these other deals with a DeMar DeRozan or a Malik Monk.
Brett Siegel, thank you so much for joining us, man. Enjoy your time in Vegas. Enjoy your time in Orlando. 2 places that should be warmer. I know it can get cold in Vegas from time to time, but enjoy your time out there. Happy holidays, and we will definitely be talking to you soon, my guy. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Alan. Thanks.
Great stuff there from Brett Siegel, National NBA Insider for Clutch Points. Let's react to everything that Brett had to say, because that sweetener role for Keon, now it depends on what you might get back and what that level is of player. And does that interest you? Maybe it's a former top 10 pick that has kind of flamed out a bit, and it's time for a second draft situation. Let's keep that conversation going, and we hear from Mark Spears what he had to say about the Kings saying, no, you will not get a first-round pick, Warriors. You messed that one up. Allen Stiles, Sactown Sports.
A Sacramento tradition continues this year. The Santa Parade, free for all to enjoy.